Imagine you're sitting in a quiet, sun-drenched room. Across from you is a person you've never met holding a single card. On that card is nothing but a symmetrical, chaotic splash of black ink. They ask you a simple question. What might this be? In that moment, your brain does something incredible. It doesn't just see ink on paper. It begins to reach into the basement of your subconscious. It pulls out memories, fears, and shadows you thought were locked away. You might see a butterfly or a pair of lungs, or perhaps a predator waiting in the grass. What you don't realize is that you aren't describing the card at all. You are describing the internal map of your own soul. Every jagged edge you perceive is a reflection of a boundary you've built. Every monster you find is a ghost of a trauma that hasn't quite left you yet. Today, we're exploring how your imagination acts as a mirror. We're diving into the world of projective tests, the Rorschach and the TAT. We're going to see how these ink blots can map the parts of you that words can't reach. At the heart of these tests is a concept called the projective hypothesis. It suggests that when we're faced with a stimulus that is vague or ambiguous, we can't help but fill in the blanks. Our brains hate a vacuum of meaning, so to make sense of a messy ink blot, you project your own internal structure onto it. Think of it like a movie projector. The film is your personality, your needs, your hidden conflicts, and your past. The ink blot is just the white screen. Whatever movie plays on that screen is coming entirely from inside of you. Psychologists call this apperception. It's the process of perceiving new stimuli through the lens of your existing experiences. If you grew up in an environment where you had to be constantly on guard, you might see eyes watching you in the ink. If you are currently feeling a deep need for connection, you might see two people reaching for each other. This isn't just imagination, it's a bypass for your ego's defenses. When a therapist asks you a direct question like, "Are you depressed?" your conscious mind can filter the answer. But when they ask, "What is this ink blot?" your defenses don't know what to hide. You spill your subconscious truths because you think you're just talking about a piece of paper. Let's go back to the early 1900s to a young Swiss psychiatrist named Hermann Rorschach. As a child, Hermann had a nickname that almost seems like destiny, Kleck. In German, that means inkblot. He was obsessed with a popular game at the time called Klexography. It was simple. You'd drop ink on a page, fold it, and see what shapes appeared. But while other kids saw birds or flowers, Hermann saw something deeper. He noticed that his friends all saw wildly different things in the same blot. Later, as a doctor working in a quiet asylum, he noticed something even more haunting. Patients with schizophrenia saw the world through a completely different lens than those without it. Their inkblot world was fragmented, sharp, and often terrifying. Hermann realized these blots weren't just a game, they were a diagnostic key. He spent years painstakingly hand-painting hundreds of blots to find the perfect 10. He wasn't looking for cool shapes. He was looking for triggers, visual hooks that would snag on a person's subconscious. He died tragically young, just 9 months after publishing his work. He never got to see his childhood game become the most famous psychological tool in history. He never saw how his Klex would eventually map the trauma of millions. Most people think the Rorschach is just about what you see. I see a bat, or I see a butterfly. But in reality, a trained psychologist is looking at how you see it. This is where the Exner Comprehensive System comes in. The scoring is broken down into 3 main pillars. First, location. Do you look at the whole blot, or do you focus on a tiny, isolated detail? People who focus only on the small edges might be hypervigilant or obsessive. Second, determinants. Are you reacting to the shape, the color or the shading of the ink. If you see fire because the ink is red, it tells us about your emotional reactivity. If you see smoke because of the gray shading, it might point to a deep, underlying anxiety. Third, content and popularity. There are popular answers that about 30% of people see. If you don't see any of the populars, it suggests your perception of reality is highly unconventional. It's not a pass or fail test. It's a measurement of your perceptual accuracy and your cognitive flexibility. If you struggle to find a single image, we look at refusal. This often signals a massive internal wall, a defense mechanism so strong it blocks out the imagination entirely. I once heard of a clinical case that perfectly illustrates how trauma rewrites our sight. A man sat down for his assessment, looking perfectly composed in his suit. He was successful, articulate, and seemed entirely normal by every social standard. But as the cards were flipped, a pattern began to emerge. On card 1, where most see a bat or a winged figure, he saw a shredded carcass. On card 6, often associated with texture and intimacy, he saw shrapnel from an explosion. By the time they reached the final cards, every inkblot was a scene of devastation. He wasn't failing the test. He was showing the therapist his internal landscape. Years of suppressed military trauma had turned his world into a minefield. To him, the ink wasn't just ink. It was a reminder of a world that wasn't safe. His brain was so primed for danger that it couldn't find beauty in the abstract. He saw monsters because in his reality, the monsters had been very real. This is the power of the projective test. It bypasses the suit and tie version of ourselves. It shows the therapist the version of you that is still hypervigilant and hurting. If the Rorschach is a map of your perception, the Thematic Apperception Test, TAT, is a map of your relationships. Developed by Henry Murray and Christiana Morgan at Harvard, it uses 31 cards. Unlike the inkblots, these cards show actual people in ambiguous situations. The instructions are simple. Tell me a story about this picture. What happened before? What is happening now, and how does it end? Murray's theory was based on two main concepts, needs and press. Your needs are your internal drivers, the need for achievement, power, or affiliation. The press is how you perceive the environment acting upon you. If you look at a picture of a boy with a violin and say, he's exhausted because his father is forcing him to practice, that's a press of dominance. It suggests you view authority figures as demanding or restrictive. But if you say, he's dreaming of becoming a master, that's a high need for achievement. The therapist isn't looking for a correct story. They're looking for your themas, the recurring patterns in how you view the world. Do your stories usually end in failure? Are your characters always alone? Your brain is literally auditioning your own life experiences to play the roles in the story. Think about the last time you had a misunderstanding with a friend, or that moment you walked into a room and felt like everyone was judging you. In those moments, you were essentially taking a TAT in real life. You were looking at an ambiguous social scene and telling yourself a story. Maybe the story was, they think I'm a failure. Or maybe it was, they're just busy and tired. We are constantly projecting our internal scripts onto the people around us. The TAT just brings that process into the light, where we can finally see it. It's like looking into a mirror that doesn't show your face, but your expectations. If you've been hurt, your stories will naturally have more villains. If you've been neglected, your stories will have characters who are always waiting. By telling these stories to a stranger, you're actually telling them to yourself. You're finally hearing the script that has been running your life from the wings. And once you hear the script, you gain the power to change the ending.
Now, if you're a fan of hard data, you might be asking, is this actually science? The Rorschach and TAT have been at the center of a psychological X-ray debate for decades. Critics argue that these tests lack reliability, meaning two different doctors might score the same inkblot differently. Unlike a multiple choice test, there is no objective key for your imagination. Because of this, many modern psychologists prefer the MMPI or other self-report inventories. However, the Rorschach regained its scientific footing with the RPAS, the Rorschach Performance Assessment System. This system turned the vibes of the test into a rigorous, standardized set of data points. While it might not be a crystal ball for predicting behavior, it is a peerless tool for qualitative depth. An IQ test tells us how smart you are, but a projective test tells us how you feel about being smart. It reveals the texture of your personality that a bubble sheet simply can't capture. It's the difference between reading a person's medical chart and reading their private diary. One gives you the facts, the other gives you the truth.
At the end of the day, these tests are about more than just a diagnosis. They are about the courage to look at a mess of ink and admit what we see. Because once you realize that the monsters in the cards are your own shadows, they start to lose their power over you. You begin to see that your imagination hasn't just been a map of your trauma, it's also been a map of your survival. The fact that you can find meaning in the chaos is a sign of your brain's resilience. You aren't just a passive observer of your life, you are the one writing the script. So the next time you look at something messy, a broken relationship, a failed project, ask yourself, what am I projecting onto this? Is it the truth of the situation, or is it a ghost from 10 years ago? When you start to separate the ink from the story, you finally get to hold the pen. And that is where the real healing begins.